All you gotta do is relax, sit back. Let me tell a little story. I used to love sports, baseball and basketball. Actually, I lied. I hated baseball. I love basketball and football. Running track.
So you can't hear your own voice this time?
Yes, sir. Running back.
I'm so
All
good.
day
Okay.
sports
So
was
good.
the best thing.
Thank you,
Madden
Sean.
09,
I appreciate
best
it.
thing.
So, new audio format
I
this
even
time.
love FIFA,
We're recording it in
soccer.
Audacity, and hopefully going to be able to
hockey,
mix in
because it
little
knocks
B
you
songs
off.
that we all know and love.
That we just listened to right now.
Yeah, and make it into a legit sounding podcast. So, let's get going. Big news. Christian bought me in and out because he bet that the Lightning were going to win the Cup since they beat his Rangers pretty bad in Game 7. And I said that the Blackhawks were going to win the Cup because they beat my Ducks pretty bad in Game 7.
Yeah, it doesn't look like a good bet in retrospect, as Chicago is kind of looking like a hockey dynasty in a sport that doesn't produce too many dynasties anymore.
Yeah, kind of like the Giants right now in baseball.
Yeah.
The Kings last year anyway.
Yeah.
Although we'll see how that keeps going forward. And possibly the Warriors.
Yeah, they're definitely set up to have long-term success, this team. We should probably kick it off with them because they are the big news of the week. They've been the big news of the past couple of weeks, and as most people would have predicted since the beginning of the season, the Golden State Warriors are your 2014-2015 NBA champions.
Wait, hold on a sec. Did you say as most people would have predicted before the start of the season?
Did not say before the start of the season, at the
Okay.
beginning of the season, because after the Warriors went on their 20-2 run to begin the season, I think most people were like, okay, this team is legitimate. They are probably the favorites, and they remain the favorites throughout the entire season, and any talk about any other team trying to upend them was probably speculation about their inexperience in the playoffs or just trying to rouse up some actual sports conversation.
Yeah, the Cavs didn't get going until late. The Hawks went on a tear about midway through the season, but towards the end were kind of sputtering. So, yeah, the Warriors were the truest contenders. Oh, don't forget the Spurs,
Yeah,
because they went
yeah.
on a huge tear
Yeah.
before the beginning of the playoffs.
It's entirely possible, though, that the Spurs were the second or third best team in the West, and we just didn't get to see them advance because they happened to play the Clippers in the first round. Like, what could they have done?
Yeah, I mean, well, I think Jalen pointed out on Tuesday night on the ESPN broadcast that the Warriors, all the teams they faced had injured starting point guards. They didn't face the Clippers or the Spurs, but that doesn't take away from their championship whatsoever because every single championship there ever was involves some amount of luck.
Absolutely. Well, the Warriors earned that position by being the best team throughout the regular season. They got to face the quote-unquote weakest competition throughout the playoffs because they earned that position.
Yeah, and it tells you how good of a team the Warriors are that Steph Curry won MVP while playing, 30, 35 minutes a game?
Mm-hmm.
And when your MVP doesn't play, 40 minutes a game,
Didn't play a lot of fourth quarters this season.
yeah, it just shows you how deep that team is. And they deserved every bit of that championship, and kudos to them.
Yeah. What I would like to point out about these NBA finals that we just saw, a surprisingly entertaining final round in what I would classify as an overall pretty unentertaining playoffs.
Yeah, an entertaining final round, but for what I've heard, I think Phil Jackson tweeted about it, saying that it wasn't good basketball.
Yeah,
Because the thing is, Cavs had to play a certain way to try and slow down the Warriors, and that wasn't pretty basketball. And the Warriors didn't start off playing that great. So as far as great basketball, it was nothing like last year's finals where the Spurs were playing, the basketball opera on the Miami Heat. But it doesn't have to be good basketball to be good TV.
No, it doesn't. But how much of these Phil Jackson quotes this past year have been sour grapes over losing Steve Kerr and for managing a terrible basketball franchise?
I mean, Phil Jackson's always played with the media anyway.
Phil Jackson just released a statement, not a statement, he was quoted in an interview saying that he was surprised that he didn't get a vote for NBA
That was a
Executive of the
joke.
Year. Come on.
No, that was a joke because the Lakers head executive, whose name is
Mitch Kupchak.
Mitch Kupchak got a vote for Executive of the Year. So Phil thought that was funny, and so he's like, why didn't somebody vote for me?
Okay, but
Because the Lakers are obviously tanking as well.
regardless, Phil Jackson has not had a very good year at the microphone. His quotations have been less than stellar. I can't say his performance has been less than stellar with the Knicks because he didn't have really much to work with, and we'll see how he does going forward. But he's starting to look like the old man get off my porch of the NBA.
I mean, he's been that for a while now.
Yeah, he is pretty old, but I think his reputation as an innovator is slowly dying away. And for one, I kind of embrace that because I like this Warriors team and how they were unstoppable without any bigs on the floor. This is a team who we considered Andrew Bogut to be one of their most important players heading into this season, and they sat him in the last 2 games and didn't need him whatsoever.
But yeah, it was kind of interesting that way because in the finals, both teams had to play very differently from the way that they played to get there. Because, I mean, Bogut was great for them all year. He contributed majorly to getting 67 wins. You know, playoffs are dictated by matchups. And so you got to play who's going to be the most effective. And having a 6'7" Draymond Green as center worked super well. Positionless basketball, as Jalen Rose said. And it's fun to watch. And I like how teams feel each other out through a series. Because you don't get that during the regular season because, you know, it's one game on to the next, one game on to the next. But when the teams really feel each other out, that's when the coaches can really do their best. And speaking of coaches, the future looks murky for David Blatt in Cleveland.
It doesn't look to be a future for David Blatt in Cleveland. If I were him and I had any ounce of pride, which might be overshadowed by a hefty investment from his owner Dan Gilbert, why would I want to stay? Well, is there any reason why you would besides the money that he's getting?
I think that Blatt knows that he's a good coach. And he's been coaching overseas for decades before he got to an NBA job, and he always wanted an NBA job because, you know, that's the pinnacle of basketball coaching. But he didn't get the job he was originally hired for, to be sure, because they hired him a few months before LeBron going to Cleveland was any thought in anyone's mind, including LeBron's. So, yeah, it probably would be for the best if he went, but not a great mark on LeBron's reputation, really. Because, I don't know, like, what was his name? Windhorst?
Brian Windhorst
was saying that during the finals, LeBron was, like, huddling up with assistant coach Tyronn Lue a lot, trying to avoid Blatt, making his own substitutions. That relationship has to be untenable. And we're going to, I think, probably most likely going to see Tyronn Lue, who's most famous for, by the way, being stepped over by Allen Iverson in the 2001 finals, which is one of my favorite NBA highlights of all time.
Tyronn Lue, by the way, has been very gracious about that moment. He's willing to talk about it with anyone who approaches him about it.
Yeah, it's a great moment in basketball history. Nobody saw it will ever forget it. But he's been up and coming as a coach for a while now. And he was in discussions to be hired for the Cleveland job before they gave it to David Blatt. And he's an assistant coach there, so he knows the players, he knows the system. So, you know, it would make sense for him to be hired if they were to get rid of David Blatt. You know, I mean, you wish LeBron could get along with Blatt, but the thing is, he's such a genius at basketball. You know, it would make sense that he would want to make his own substitutions and run his own sets. So, but it's such a hard thing to balance that because, I mean, MJ and Kobe, they had, you know, as big of egos as you're ever going to see in sports, but they also played for Phil Jackson, one of the best coaches ever, and an excellent manager of egos. That's what got him his rings more than anything, I think.
Very true.
And David Blatt is not that because he doesn't have any experience with that kind of thing because he comes from Euro and international coaching where the coach is the man, kind of like college ball, you know?
Yeah. And it's such a fascinating situation because I can't think of a time in modern history across sports where we have someone so capable of being a player coach as LeBron James. Now, that's not saying that I think he would make a good coach. I think LeBron James, for all he knows about the X's and O's of basketball, probably doesn't understand how to deal with management, for instance. I don't think he understands player development as well as most coaches in the league. But it's pretty obvious that LeBron, throughout this situation, has wanted to maintain control of the basketball operations of that franchise without having the titles, which would come with the responsibility if a failure were to occur. Because when the Cavs started off under 500 in their first 30 games of the season, none of the fingers were being pointed at LeBron James. It's entirely possible that that stretch is due to his failures as a basketball manager. But since he didn't have the title of president of basketball operations, which he should be having in Cleveland, he didn't get the storm that should have been coming in his direction. No?
The funny thing is that the actual executives turned that team around. They brought in Mozgov, J.R. Shumpert, got rid of Dion, Swish Waiters, made that team a better team. And who won Executive of the Year this year? Was it Dan Gilbert?
No, it was definitely not Dan Gilbert. Well, first of all, Dan Gilbert is the owner of the team, not the executive.
Oh, sorry.
I'm pretty sure it was Golden State's executive, whose name escapes me right now. I'm pretty
sure. He did hire
sure.
Steve Kerr.
Yeah. I mean, that was a pretty obvious hire. But probably the less obvious firing of Mark Jackson, which led to it, because Mark Jackson was a successful and popular basketball coach in Oakland, and it could have easily gone the wrong way, and they stumbled upon a heck of a coaching candidate and took advantage of it. And Kerr didn't really have much to coach, to be perfectly honest, because he had a team that was built for a deep playoff run to begin with, and got incredibly lucky with injuries. Let us not forget that they were the only team that was healthy throughout the playoffs.
Yeah, like you said, player development is a really, really hard thing to do. Mark Jackson developed Steph and Clay and Draymond. And that's a huge contribution to their current title.
And Steve Kerr had to make some really important decisions. He took David Lee, a former first-team All-NBA, and said, "You are now a bench player," and that is
same with Iguodala, who hadn't been benched in 10 seasons previously.
Speaking of, by the way, is it only a semi-travesty, or is it a full travesty that Iguodala was the MVP of that final series?
Well, I don't think it could ever be a travesty, because that's not the trophy that everybody wants.
No.
But LeBron was definitely the most valuable player in that series. And Iguodala, while certainly being the primary difference maker for Golden State in that he guarded LeBron and he provided offense when needed and pace. But, yeah, definitely LeBron was the MVP. But, just like the MVP of the league, it's an award for being the best player on the best team instead of just being the best player, period.
When we have these discussions about the MVP of the regular season, that the term value or valuable always gets thrown into the mix. Is it the player with the best overall performance? Is it best player, best team? Is it the most invaluable player in the league, without which this team would have a far more significant gap? I think we don't even need to have that discussion with regards to this particular Finals MVP discussion, because LeBron James had the most impressive Finals performance I have ever seen in my life. I have never seen a player play as well as LeBron James did. He was obviously the best player on the court. And even if you want to have the best player on the winning team discussion, Andre Iguodala was not the best player on the Golden State Warriors. Steph Curry, who did not play to his averages, did not play to his potential, was still by far and away the most important player on that team. The reason why Iguodala was getting open shots was because Curry was drawing double teams. Curry still drained buckets when he needed to. He had a tough first couple of games, but he really hammered it out in the end. Steph Curry was the best player on that team. I can't.
Well, I mean, I think what the Iguodala MVP shows is that if you beat LeBron in the finals and you're the one defending him, Kawhi Leonard,
I think that was
you're going to get the MVP.
I think that was a very different situation because with the Spurs last year, that was such a total team effort that I feel like the writers gave the MVP to the player they saw on the floor the most. And Kawhi Leonard played the vast majority of the minutes in those finals.
Yeah,
Everyone
he
else,
was one of the few young guys.
he was the only indispensable Spur in that series. Could you argue that he was the best one? Who knows? Duncan had a pretty good series. Patty Mills had a great series. Boris Diaw had a great series. Leonard guarded LeBron, and that was the reason they gave, I believe, for that MVP award. But you could still make an argument that Kawhi was the best player. I don't see an argument for Iguodala being the best player. The fire starter, catalyst, absolutely. He had an excellent defensive performance, but he wasn't even the best player on his own team, much less the best player in that series.
Well, you know, I think I heard somewhere during the broadcast where they mentioned that Iguodala had gotten 7 votes for Finals MVP and LeBron had gotten 4. And that seems to me like a shockingly small number of votes. So it's not a very small group of people that decide this award.
Some transparency would be appreciated, no? Like, I thought that was pretty shocking, too.
So what's new in the wild world of sports besides the finals?
Well, we can start speculating about this way too early NBA offseason. Who's moving where, for what reasons, what's going to happen. I think a good place to start would be all of these ridiculous changes happening to the Los Angeles Clippers.
Oh,
our wonderful second team.
The rebranding.
The terrible new logo that has come out, accompanied with some awful jerseys. Now, it should be noted that the primary Clippers logo is a direct copy of the primary Lakers logo. There is...
Yeah, it's quite similar now that you mentioned that. I haven't thought of it before.
This wasn't a coincidence. This was Donald Sterling trying to ride the coattails of the Lakers after he purchased the San Diego Clippers, moving them to Los Angeles to try to compete with their market, giving them a very similar logo, trying to suck away some of that fan base. The Clippers have always been the shadow to the Lakers, and by design. I can understand why they would want a new logo. I can understand why they would want a new building, as Steve Ballmer is now looking into. But it seems to be happening way too quickly because, man, those jerseys look terrible, do they not?
They don't look great, honestly. And, I mean, it's 2015, and everybody and their mother is a designer of some kind. And they must have gotten a gajillion proposals when Steve Ballmer put out the call for a redesign. I don't know who had the final word, probably Ballmer, obviously.
It's not as if they had nothing to work with either, because as overused as it is, the red, white, and blue color scheme tends to pop out very nicely on jerseys and on courts and on ice, whatever you're using it in. And their logo, their identity is a Clipper. Like, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, the Clipper ship.
Like, let's put some boats in that logo. Why are we focusing on the LAC? It looks like an old Chicago Cubs logo. It's awful.
Well, they definitely want to get the LA out there front and center.
It's awful, but that's a sartorial thing. I can understand why that's not terribly important. But the Clippers have gone out and they've made a few moves. Lance Stephenson has signed with the Clippers, probably the first of their few big acquisitions they're going to make throughout the summer.
They traded Matt Barnes and Spencer Hawes to Charlotte to make that deal happen. A lot of Charlotte fans are very unhappy with that deal.
Lance Stephenson underperformed terribly this year.
He did, but Spencer Hawes is a $10.5 million contract for, and he's not worth that much money. And Matt Barnes is old and probably over the hill. Yeah.
It could be not a great trade for either side, but hopefully a change of scenery will be good for Lance Stephenson, who for 2 years was an incredibly exciting player.
pushes the coach's son down on the depth chart, though.
Oh, yeah, I'm not sure Mama Rivers is going to be happy about that.
Yeah, well, he's probably not the last move the Clippers are going to try and make.
No, they have a really big decision to make with DeAndre Jordan coming up because as deep as the pockets of their owner are, I don't think they are willing to pay three players max contracts. That might be too difficult for them to balance. So they're going to have to choose eventually between DeAndre and Blake.
Well, I don't think so much as choose between DeAndre and Blake, but try to somehow convince DeAndre to play for less than the max. Or if they give DeAndre the max and keep Blake and Chris, I mean, they would love to have that, but also they know that the issues have been with their bench recently, and that thins out their bench even more. So yeah, tough decision to make in a salary cap league, and it's hard to keep the band together these days.
Yeah, it's harder in the NBA than it's ever been, even with small market friendly contracts that allow teams to offer more money to retain their players than competing franchises. You still see players moving around all the time. That doesn't seem to be working too hot. We're going to see that probably with LaMarcus Aldridge coming up this year. We might see it with Marc Gasol, although he probably will stay in Memphis. It's one of the things that makes the NBA such a fascinating off-season league to follow, because there is so much movement, much more than in baseball, much more than football. But it does make it difficult for fans to attach themselves to players that they've grown fond of the years.
Because one day they're there, and they've been there for 10 plus years or whatever, and the next day they're out the door.
Yeah.
And it happens during mid-season a lot.
Yeah.
That's not so common in other leagues.
There's a wonderful picture of in 1999. This picture was taken with Patrick Ewing on the Orlando Magic and Hakeem Olajuwon on the Toronto Raptors.
I did see that picture recently.
For late 90s basketball fans, it's understandable but slightly traumatic. But for anyone nowadays, that's just business. It happens all the time. Franchise players move like it's nothing.
And that's why when people, when Kobe got his deal for his last few years, and a lot of people are saying what a dumb move it was by the Lakers organization, it means a lot to have Kobe retire a Laker.
It does.
It means, probably more than any player in the history of the franchise, including Magic Johnson and Kareem, for him to retire a Laker, because you want to keep selling the Kobe jerseys. You want him to come back to have some kind of role in the franchise after he's retired. You want him to be your brand ambassador. It's a lot harder to do that if he had to spend his twilight years somewhere else.
Yeah. And I will defend the Kobe contract from both sides for a long time to come. For Kobe, obviously it makes sense. $25 million a year. Obviously, you take that. From the Lakers' perspective, he is the franchise. He is the one that sells jerseys, as you said. But also, it's really important for franchises to display a sense of loyalty to their best. How does a franchise treat its best?
And Miami's been having a problem with that in respect to Dwayne Wade.
Absolutely, that's been an issue, but the way a franchise treats its best is a way they can recruit free agents to come. And I think the Lakers are playing the long game in this situation. The Spurs have their own way of recruiting, but they've treated their players generally really well. And players have always said they like playing for the Spurs. I think a better example would be in Dallas. Mark Cuban has shown such a generosity with Dirk Nowitzki that he has attracted a lot of players that really have had no business going to Dallas to play basketball, to go there and play basketball.
And he's gotten Dirk to take pay cuts.
Absolutely.
Because Dirk is 100% behind that franchise.
Absolutely. And it's that sort of rapport that doesn't make too much sense to fans at the beginning that pays incredibly later on. And this is a problem that we're seeing in Miami. If Dwayne Wade, for instance, doesn't get the money that he is owed by the Heat after taking pay cuts and cuts in his playing time during the prime of his career to make room for the best player in the world. Why would any free agent want to go down there? I mean, besides the sun and the no state taxes, but why would any free agent want to play for a Pat Riley who doesn't treat the greatest player in franchise history with the sort of respect that he deserves?
Yeah, that's the thing about Pat Riley. He's been with 3 different franchises, and he's not a one franchise kind of guy. And obviously, the Miami Heat is his landing spot, and he'll be done with basketball after he finishes working in Miami. But he has kind of got that all business kind of thing going about him, and so a lot of Miami fans are nervous about that because they're not sure if he's the kind of guy who will offer Wade the money he's asking for.
Which would be understandable if he isn't going to offer Wade, because Wade has shown in the past couple of years when he's healthy, he's good. He probably deserves the money when he is healthy, but he just often isn't that healthy, and that's not the smart investment to make. And this is a business after all. This is a league that runs on wealthy men who know how to manage their money, and there's no two ways about it. Dwayne Wade is the greatest player in franchise history. He's also, along with Alonzo Mourning, the most unpredictable player in franchise history.
Well, maybe if Hassan Whiteside stays longer, he could probably take that cake. You know, speaking of managing money, Tim Duncan, it has recently been reported, got fleeced out of $25 million by his former financial advisor and will be taking him to court. It really brings up the problem of, you know, because a lot of people in the media and, you know, people on Twitter or whatever like to rack on athletes for their poor money habits, which are widespread.
Mm-hmm.
But they always have someone managing their money.
You have to.
And it's really hard to get someone you trust managing your money. Yeah. Like my dad, he manages money for a family he used to train horses for. And he gets paid, like he's told me, he gets paid more than market value for his job because his employer trusts him with that kind of stuff. And trust is expensive.
Yeah.
And so, you know, basketball players, you know, they get recommended to these agents by their friends, and, you know, these agents who keep fleecing people still keep getting clients. So yeah. I hope Tim really hits this guy hard in court.
One of my pet peeves about fans in general is they never side with athletes on money issues. And anytime I hear someone talking about, these players shouldn't be complaining about making X amount of money when they should be making X amount of money, the truth is, especially in the NBA with this one-and-done rule in college, nobody comes in with a business degree. No one comes in with an economics degree. Very few people come in with degrees at all. These are men who don't know how to manage money. And as you said, they have to have a person manage their money. And not only do they have to have a person, they have to have a person immediately come in and manage your money. With that sort of newfound wealth coming in so quickly, how do you know who to trust? How do you know this person isn't going to fleece you? And Tim Duncan is probably going to be all right. He's made more than $100 million throughout his career. He seems to be a pretty frugal guy. In fact, the first thing that I thought of when I heard about the story is that the satirical newspaper The Onion has published a series of Tim Duncan giving financial advice stories to his teammates, and they're all hilarious. Obviously not rooted in truth if this has happened to him right now. But this is not uncommon, and we're only hearing about something like this now because Tim Duncan is such a high-profile player who has made a lot of money, but this happens all the time in professional sports, and it really is a tale of more money, more problems, or more money, more people you have to look at trying to grab it.
There's always going to be leeches out there who want to survive off of other people's success.
And it should be noted the Tim Duncan case is built off an accusation about his financial advisor forging documents and forging his signature. Something that that advisor malevolently and illegally did to fleece Tim Duncan of his money. But there are ways that people can legally take these athletes' money without any sort of repercussions from the justice system. And this happens all the time. There's virtually nothing that we can do about it. And as long as these players stay uneducated, that's just what's going to happen.
Yeah, that's the tragedy of it. And it's been going on for a long, long time. So we talked about basketball a whole lot.
Yeah, well, we had to get it out of our system. Basketball's done for months, so what can we do?
Yeah. What's on right now? Well, what's on right now, Christian, is baseball.
The only thing that is on right now.
I don't forget Major League Soccer, man.
I will.
Well, that's your prerogative.
No, the American soccer is not what we're talking about right now. It's not. Why are we talking about American soccer?
Because I like it. And lots of people like it. In fact, I just saw a YouTube channel where Englishmen talk about Major League Soccer, and they actually genuinely like it.
No, they don't.
They do. 100%
no,
legit.
No. They like it in the sense that they like soccer, and they'll be willing to talk about the second Turkish league as well as they'll talk about the MLS.
It's true that they're probably soccer hungry since the English season finished up a little while ago. But anyway, baseball.
Baseball is a very unique sport in that it's the only one of the four major professional sports that has the captive American audience for months. Because from right now until essentially late August, early September, there's nothing on but baseball.
Pretty much on the major networks anyway. And so the Dodgers still leading their division.
Yeah.
Even though they've been going through a little bit of slump lately.
Yeah.
But they just won on a walk-off,
Mm-hmm.
which is probably the greatest way to win a walk-off ever.
Well, certainly the least climactic.
But hilarious in a certain way.
Oh, absolutely.
The Mets still leading their division.
My Mets are still leading the division miraculously. You know that they are 26th in runs in Major League Baseball. Their offense is horrendous, and yet they're still leading their division. Go figure.
Well, a lot of good pitchers.
This baseball season has been very weird. There's only been one team that has really stood out as a almost guaranteed lock for the playoffs, and that is the St. Louis Cardinals, who happen to be part of a major FBI investigation. How wonderful is this?
It is actually exceedingly wonderful because every other baseball fan hates the Cardinals and wants to see them fall and crash and burn miserably.
Mm-hmm.
And so people are waiting for something like this. Just like the New England Patriots, where people will be like, oh, those dastardly Cardinals.
Sure. For the record, I have visited St. Louis. I've been to a game at Busch Stadium. Their fans are very nice. I wouldn't say they're any better than any other fans in baseball, but I had a lovely time. I have no animosity against the St. Louis Cardinals, except for what they did to my Mets in 2006, but that is a story for another day.
Well, I probably have more animosity towards them because they beat the Dodgers for several years now in the playoffs.
Oh, hush. Nothing like 2006. And the Mets were... In 2006, that was the Mets' one opportunity in the last 20 years to win the World Series. They were the best team in baseball. And
they got to the World Series in 99.
In 2000, yes, they did. Kind of on a fluke. Anyway, this is a fascinating investigation because we spent so much time this year talking about Deflategate. Deflategate was a situation in which one team tried to gain an advantage by deflating a marginal advantage that probably couldn't have been needed anyway by deflating footballs. The FBI is involved in this investigation. This is Deflategate times 50.
Yeah, and if it had happened to a football team, it would have been major news. And not like it's not a big news already. But can you imagine if the Patriots were found to have hacked into the Jets?
No doubt. If this was an NFL story, we would be hearing about it in every single news outlet imaginable. But I think this story isn't gaining as much traction as it should because the details we're hearing about this is that the Cardinals didn't really hack into their system by any technological methods. The Astros management left around old passwords from what
That's how most
I've read.
hacking happens.
That is how most hacking happens. That is true. But that's something where a lot of the major public's like, really? The FBI is trying to investigate this? It just seems like carelessness from the Astros front office. No, it is cyber fraud, and it is incredibly illegal. And everyone involved in the Cardinals organization is facing 5 to 10 years of jail time. And this is something that is happening to the model franchise in Major League Baseball. There is no franchise in the modern day that is as respected with how it is run and operated as the St. Louis Cardinals. And to find out that there is some shenanigans involved, some unprecedented shenanigans, because this isn't like pitchers using pine tar where everyone knows it happens and just lets it go even though it's illegal. This is something that we have not heard ever. Teams stealing other people's digital information. And I mean, let's think about this for a second. The fact that the Houston Astros have been bad for so long and the St. Louis Cardinals have been good for so long in the last decade, maybe this is the reason. Maybe this has something to do with it. The Cardinals stealing Astros trade secrets and using them against them. It's not out of the question. This to me is fascinating. I have no idea what the fallout from this is going to be. The rational thinking person in me says the Major League Baseball should not do anything to the Cardinals. This is not a territory where they can play Punisher. The FBI is going to do the punishing that they need, and anything on top of any sort of jail time is probably just a wasted effort by Major League Baseball. But if they don't do anything, I mean, how's that going to look?
They're probably going to take the wait and see route and wait until the court case is through before they make any sort of determination about suspensions or fines. I would assume they will probably fine them because that punishes the executives in the organization and not the players.
Yeah.
Who are all, by all accounts, good people, the players. Yeah. And I'm sure they're really ashamed to hear about this. And I'm sure the first thing they did was to reach out to all their friends on the Houston team to be like, dude, we didn't know anything about this. This is horrible.
Yeah. And
I hope we can get past this, you know. So it's a dark moment for baseball, but baseball's had a lot of dark moments in the past couple of decades, and it'll live through this. But it'll be interesting to see if this sets some kind of precedent and if this starts happening more often.
Yeah, we'll see. I think the FBI is going to be more cognizant about any sort of digital problems in Major League Baseball's infrastructure, as our teams are going to be more cautious about any snooping that they would think about doing in the game. And we'll see how this goes. This to me is the most fascinating story in Major League Baseball, but it's been a slow summer for baseball. Not a lot of storylines have come out. The one big one that has kind of smoldered throughout this entire year, the reemergence of baseball's demon child, Alex Rodriguez, has now come into the forefront. He hit his 3,000th hit today. He is now one of two players in Major League history with 3,000 hits, 2,000 RBI, and 600 home runs. The other being Hank Aaron, a top 10 baseball player by all accounts. And this puts them in rather elite company. And when we're not covering it as we should be, in my opinion.
I think the media message when it comes to A-Rod has definitely, ever since the season started, it's definitely been about reconciliation and forgiveness because nobody wants to dwell on the horrible cheating and the immorality and all that. Because, and it's definitely helped that A-Rod is having a very good year. Because if he was having a crappy year like most people expected, then some people have been like, you see, you can't do it without the drugs.
Mm.
But,
and by the way, it's still entirely possible that he's taking drugs. Like, the MLB has a hush-hush policy regarding the releasing of information. But, I mean, the idea that a player would stop taking performance-enhancing drugs in Major League Baseball once they start, to me, is a bit naive, considering the cost-benefit analysis of it all. For instance, Bartolo Colon has been caught twice for PEDs, both very late in his career. Bartolo Colon has extended his career tremendously, far greater than most starting pitchers in Major League Baseball. Now, that could be because he has superior genetics. It could be because he has this weight training program that we never knew of. But he has been caught twice for human growth hormone, and I suspect that he has decided that those 50 and 100 game suspensions are worth the extra 5 or 6 years and probably $20 or $30 million he's getting.
Yeah, it is a pretty logical cost-benefit analysis when you think of it that way, although it's certainly a little humorous to think about Bartolo Colon and superior genetics.
Yeah.
But it's true. I mean, genetics play a huge part in being a great athlete.
Yeah, it does. Alex Rodriguez is, in my opinion, the second best player I have ever seen behind Barry Bonds. And to me, there's no reason why he shouldn't be in the Hall of Fame. That's a very long discussion for another time. If you can share an opinion, go ahead.
I'm not too up on baseball Hall of Fame politics, except for the fact that I know that there is a ton of politics when it comes to the Baseball Hall of Fame,
yes.
like way more than any other Hall of Fame ever.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's so old, I would presume.
Not necessarily. The main issue is because baseball has such a selective Hall of Fame class. Like, every year, no more than 2 or 3 members get elected into Cooperstown. And football and basketball and hockey can get a dozen every year into their Hall of Fame. Baseball is just so selective about who they let into their famed hall that you do end up with a lot of politics. And I think the main issue regarding Hall of Fame politics, besides how shitty the voting system is terrible, but the main issue regards people who believe the Hall of Fame should be a reward and people who believe the Hall of Fame should be a museum. The idea that you should celebrate everything that's happened in the game regardless of how bad it has, or how negatively it has influenced the game, or the idea that only the people who have best represented the game should get into the Hall of Fame. This has been the argument since its inception. And that's not going to go away anytime soon, especially with all the PED users now getting on the ballot for the first time. And it is going to be interesting to see how a lot of these mostly old white men are going to vote on this ever-changing landscape.
Was it Dan LeBatard who kind of forfeited his vote by voting for Deadspin.com last year?
Yeah. What he did was, well, first of all, Deadspin, which is an incredible sports site that I think balances sports talk very well. They reached out to a Hall of Fame voter asking for their ballot. That Hall of Fame voter reneged at the last minute, but then Dan LeBatard caught wind of it and said, "Hey, I will do it. I won't even sell the ballot. I'll just give it to you." So what they did was Deadspin got the ballot. They offered the ballot to its readers, and its readers selected 10 people they wanted to vote for in the Hall of Fame, and it was a pretty decent ballot from what I saw. If you ignore PED considerations, the 10 people they chose were probably the 10 best people that were on the ballot. Dan LeBatard signed it, handed it in. After the vote was counted, Deadspin published what they did, and LeBatard lost his vote for life. Now, to me, this is a superior system than what the Hall of Fame ballot has right now. For instance, you can only vote for 10 players, which to me is ridiculous, because if you feel as if there are 20 retired players that deserve to be in the Hall of Fame, why shouldn't you vote for all 20? To me, that's only logic. Another thing is you need to have, I think it's a 70% majority in order to get on, or in order to get in the Hall of Fame. So 70% of Hall of Fame voters must vote for you in order to get into the Hall. And that is severely limiting as well. I don't understand why it needs to be 70. That seems to be very arbitrary. Another thing is that there are so many voters. The voting pool is so vast. Often there are people who have been out of baseball for the last 20 years that haven't been writing, that haven't been following, that still have a vote, while a lot of current writers and people who follow don't have a vote. For instance, everyone had Fangraphs, which is the most respected analytical site in baseball. None of those writers have a vote in the Baseball Hall of Fame, which I think is a travesty. And the Hall of Fame it's a big mess. I don't really want to get into anymore. I think I'm talking too much on the subject already. But yeah, politics, always.
So, the Mets are going to be in town on 4th of July weekend.
Mm-hmm.
Or not weekend. What day of the week?
No, it is Friday, Saturday, Sunday.
Oh, yeah. So, we're probably going to catch them. And what else is there, really, in the wide world of deportes?
Oh, you watching the Women's World Cup?
I have been, for the most part.
Okay.
The knockout stage starts really soon.
Okay.
USA is first knockout games against Colombia.
Okay. Who knocked out France from the opening round, if I recall correctly. Or not knocked them out, sorry. They beat them
in the group play.
Big upset from what I heard.
Yeah, and Colombia wasn't expected to be very good, but they've been pretty good. And USA has been somewhat underperforming this year. You know, you ask anybody why, and they'll give you 10 different reasons. You know, it appears to be kind of a coaching, tactical thing. Abby Wambach is getting up there in years, although she's still a great goal scorer, but not as quick as she used to be. And there's a couple players on the bench that some people think should be starting. I'm not well-versed enough to tell you who those players are.
Yeah. Well, this seems to be very similar to the Landon Donovan situation we had in 2014. Jurgen Klinsmann decided that Donovan, the greatest player in U.S. soccer history, was not up to snuff. He was too old to play for the squad in 2014. And he might have been right. He might not have been. We're not going to ever find out. But this seems to be a very similar situation, no?
Yeah, sort of. Except for the fact that the U.S. women's team is kind of an insular world.
Yeah.
Because they've had a lot of the same players for a long time. And so the next World Cup, there's probably going to be a lot of changes when it comes to the roster. But the Women's World Cup has been a very good TV product so far for the most part. Some of the Fox commentators are not the best.
Yeah.
I remember Norway hit an amazing free kick off the crossbar. And the commentator, she said... she just doinked it off the crossbar. I'm just like, oh my god, I'm sorry if there's any British people watching. This isn't our normal soccer commentary. And it's been on artificial fields, but most of them aren't that bad. And the knockout stage is coming, and knockout stages are always fun, always full of emotions. And the American fans have showed up big.
Well, it's easy.
Because they always do.
Well, they're in Canada. There's not far for them to go in order to get there.
Yeah, but it is really important that they're showing up big for the Women's World Cup because in the last World Cup, there were no organized American supporters groups going to the Women's World Cup, even though they went to the Men's World Cup. And now the main American supporters group, the American Outlaws, has made an official commitment to support the women's team wherever they go. And that's really big.
That is.
Because I read a story a little while ago on MLSsoccer.com about how it was kind of tough to get a real supporters culture in women's soccer for a while because it attracted, more families and stuff, and a lot of people didn't want that kind of raucous supporters culture. But they've shown they know how to do it the right way. And so there's a lot of passionate fans. I've been to a pro soccer match before in Portland, and Portland has a real good supporters culture. And there's nothing quite like a soccer supporters culture because, there's singing, they're jumping around, they're lighting flares, they're waving banners.
Well, in the United States, it's harmless enough, but I think you get, elsewhere in Europe and
South in Europe, there's a lot of crazy ultras.
Yeah, I think we should try to avoid the racism and the bottle throwing in the United States.
Yeah, although there is all kind of clubs in Europe, including one in Hamburg called St. Pauli, which has a traditional identity as a very left-wing and kind of punk rock group, which is very anti-Nazi. So there are some groups like that in Europe. And there's a cool documentary about them that I would recommend watching. I can't remember the name of the documentary, but the German football club is called St. Pauli.
Yeah.
And they play in the second German division.
Yeah.
But anyway, Women's World Cup is on. It's great television. You should watch it. It's on Fox Sports 1, I believe.
I do mean to watch it. I've been working full time, so I should probably catch games on the weekends. I do want to offer up a question that I've been sort of it's been rattling along in my head. How do you feel about the status of professional women's sports right now?
Well, it certainly depends on the sport because when it comes to tennis and golf, the traditional country club kind of sports and individual sports, the women's game is doing pretty darn well, especially tennis. But golf also, because my dad loves to watch golf all the time.
Yeah.
And women's tournaments are on the same channels as the men's tournaments. And they're getting a lot of attention. For team sports, it's not so great. Basketball, the WNBA is on a lifeline from the NBA, and that's the way it's going to be. The women's game is actually much more well respected in Europe than it is here. And in fact, most WNBA players spend the summer playing in like Spain and Russia because they get paid more there. And in fact, I can't remember her name, but one pretty famous WNBA player just signed a contract to play in Russia full time.
Diana Taurasi.
Yes.
Her name.
Wait, Diana Taurasi?
Diana Taurasi.
The one that came out of UConn?
Yes. Otherwise known as the best women's professional player.
Hold on. She didn't click the card for the draft this year.
No. Diana Taurasi was in UConn in 2004 and has been playing in the WNBA since then. What she did was she is playing for a team in Russia, and this team in Russia decided to pay Taurasi's U.S. salary in order for her not to play in the United States. She makes way more money in Russia than she does in the United States. The only reason she plays in the United States is because of the pride of playing for an American team. But since the Russian team offered to pay her salary in order not to play, she had no reason to come back. And this is an interesting parallel, I find, because I happen to think that women's sports hasn't been in any better position than they are right now. This is the best position women's sports has
I would agree with that, but there's still a lot of ground to make up.
It's still not great, especially in basketball, because the women's game could make up so much ground in basketball. I've been told by many people who analyze basketball that, for instance, women's college basketball is far more watchable than men's college basketball, which is something they could exploit for themselves. Now, as you said, the WNBA is on a lifeline. The NBA's contract with ESPN requires ESPN to broadcast WNBA games. ESPN probably would not broadcast it if it wasn't for that caveat in their contract with the NBA. And that might expire soon with the new contract that the Players Union is going to set up with the owners. Now, and along with that problem and the problem of its best player, Diana Taurasi, deciding not to play for outbidding reasons, the WNBA's biggest headlines in the past few years have all been very, very negative. The idea that Brittany Griner, the brightest star to come out of women's college basketball in the last few years, has been facing this soap opera saga of a marriage that is pinning headlines to the WNBA it's almost hard to say there's no such thing as bad press, but consistent bad press probably hurts a league more than helps.
Yeah, the WNBA is certainly going to face a crossroads in the next few years, and I hope they do well, but neither of us can say we've been to a WNBA game.
No.
I mean, you've talked about before, and you're not the first person to talk about this, lowering the women's rim to like 9 feet or something to make dunks easier.
This was actually first proposed by Geno Auriemma, and I should point out that I am not a woman. I've never played a women's sport. My opinion is less than a woman who has played a women's sport. But Geno Auriemma, coach of the women's UConn Huskies team, suggested that women's basketball should consider lowering the rim to 9 feet, and his suggestion was based off the idea that the NBA's main attraction in gameplay is the aerial stunts, dunking, alley-oops, layups. The sort of air game that the NBA has created is what gets on posters. It's what gets on highlight reels. It's what the NBA markets. That the WNBA's most like noteworthy moments are when its players dunk like once every year. It seems to be problematic. Now, I think one of the issues with Geno Auriemma saying that is Geno Auriemma said it. He is a man who suggested that women should debase their equipment in order to compete with the men for ratings. And that's problematic on a number of levels. But I don't think his suggestion should be taken away. The WNBA already has a three-point line that is further in than the NBA. The WNBA uses balls that are smaller than those used in the NBA. To me, it makes sense for them to lower the rim to 9 feet, make it a more aerial game. These women have already proved that they can shoot. They're excellent shooters. They don't need to improve upon their ball handling skills at all. I think the one thing that's missing from this game is the sort of acrobatics that we see in the NBA.
I think that the biggest obstacle to the lowering the rim issue would probably be everywhere you go, basketball rim is 10 feet. Especially in playgrounds, which have a lot of fixed rims.
That's very true.
Those are all 10-foot rims.
Very true.
Everywhere you go, no matter where you are in the world, from Serbia to Chicago to Mozambique, the rims are 10 foot.
Yeah.
And that would be a monumental change for the sport.
Mm-hmm.
And I bet there's a ton of women who play in the WNBA right now or play D1 college basketball and really love their game the way it is.
Oh, yeah.
And really take pride in playing their own way. And they probably wouldn't take too kindly to trying to have to do these measures and change their game to compete with men's basketball, because I would bet that most of them are not really terribly interested in competing with men's basketball in that sort of sense. I mean, I'm sure they would love to have higher salaries and more TV ratings and stuff like that, but they have such a strong identity of playing a game that they played their entire life on the same courts as the boys that changing the rim would be a pretty big issue.
Yeah. If any sport would be willing for that monumental change, I think it would be basketball. And I always go to this. The three-point line to me is the most monumental rule change in any major American sport. It changed basketball, and for the better.
I don't know. I would argue that the forward pass was bigger for football.
Nah, okay, the forward pass. But football was barely football before the forward pass. But I think the three-point line is the example of having the monumental change work out in basketball's favor. And basketball's always shown itself to be the most progressive league regarding not only social issues.
They are always talking about the rules.
Yeah, and they are, to me, the league that is most willing to change what it does. But I honestly had never considered the fixed rim aspect of it. That would be a very difficult change to overcome.
It's funny how basketball is a pretty progressive league, and baseball has been doing a 30 or 40 year experiment with the designated hitter, and they don't know what to do about it.
Baseball is by far the most conservative league, and still the one that has lasted the longest, which to me it's fascinating to see. Baseball's unwillingness to change is still possibly the reason why it's lasted so long.
It could be. They have certainly a very good brand integrity when you talk about the game anyway, and it's tough to compare older basketball players to today's basketball players because the game is so monumentally different because of the three-point line and because of zone defenses being legal. But when you talk about really great old baseball players, post dead ball era,
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty much the same rules.
Yeah.
And you could drop them onto modern team and expect them to do well.
Essentially, there have been, slight changes here and there. The mound was lowered in 1968, PEDs in the late 80s and early 90s, no black players until the late 40s.
Yeah.
But yeah, you could feasibly see Babe Ruth hitting against Randy Johnson. You can't really see that in any other sport because the analogy that I've been told is that basketball players are like computers. The worst computer in today's age is far better than the best computer in the 1980s.
Yeah,
like
that's a good analogy.
If we talk about like players going one-on-one, like LeBron could beat anyone ever at one-on-one. He's the most talented player of all time by far.
I recently saw a discussion on Rise/NBA about dominant players and stuff, and Wilt came up as he always does because he was the most dominant player in the history of sports ever. But they talked about how the way he played his game was he shot a lot of fadeaways, and he wasn't a Shaq kind of player where he imposed himself physically on the defense every time. And I wonder if Wilt had played, in the 90s or 2000s, would he have been a more Shaq type of player and played more physical? And his game would certainly have been a lot different, even though his athletic ability would allow him to do well in any time. But if he was playing basketball nowadays, his game would be almost totally different because the game of basketball evolves so much so quickly.
Yeah. Don't really know how that would have panned out. We've been talking for a while.
Yeah, it's been a good little podcast. Some In-N-Out Burger was nice.
Yeah, that was a nice way.
Hopefully I can edit this and make it not suck. So this is a new direction for us, and I've never edited a damn thing in my life before.
Good luck.
Yeah, I didn't even edit the video projects in high school. I left that to someone else who was willing to do it.
Is there any 1 minute thing you want to touch on before we take off? I gotta think of mine, so maybe if you could.
Well, let's see here. The way this championship season kind of unfolded for me, I'm kind of happy that it's over, even though, I'm going to miss watching basketball and hockey. But all the tension of playoff games, day after day, week after week, like especially for basketball, the playoffs are long.
Yeah, they were long.
And the tension can be kind of unbearable when it gets to the finals, because, and I can't imagine what it would have been like if I was a diehard Cleveland fan, or a diehard Golden State fan, teams who haven't won a championship in Cleveland's case ever, and in the Warriors' case 40 years. The tension would be too much for me.
Yeah.
And I can't imagine what it would be like to have the Chargers in the Super Bowl. And I'm glad that it's over because now we can just relax and watch baseball and drink beer and not pay too much attention to what goes on the field.
Definitely.
So I'm happy that summer's coming because I used to lament baseball being the only thing around, but I like baseball a lot more than I used to. Yeah. So I'm pretty cool with it.
Baseball is at worst excellent background noise, in my opinion.
Yeah. So what do you got? You got something to talk about?
Oh no, I don't. I can riff on something. What? Talking baseball.
I'm gonna give you 5 more seconds. 5.
Damn it.
4. 3.
I forgot I was gonna
2. 1. Well, we'll be back later sometime.
All right.
Let's let Little B take us out, and
all you gotta do is relax.
Good evening, y'all.
Baseball is real.
Let me tell a little story. I used to love sports, baseball and basketball. Actually, I lied. I hated baseball. I love basketball and football. Running track. Yes, sir, run it back. All day sports was the best thing. Madden 09, the best thing. I even love FIFA, soccer, and a little bit of hockey cause it knocked you off. Yeah, and they skated on ice. They been had ice before.